We're now into the 1970s. Actually, my favourite music era is the 70s, but we're talking about watches here today. Take it away, Ken.
Well, here we have two examples of the growth in fashion watches. Fashion watches had always been around, but usually the style was more important than what was inside the case. And I think of wonderful little watches that weren't very expensive, but would have been considered chic, like the Borel had a watch called the Cocktail Watch. And it wasn't expensive, but it had concentric dials working in opposite directions, and it made it look like a kaleidoscope, that kind of thing. By the 70s, people's tastes were changing. You had feminism, women's liberation had taken off, so fashion took off alongside of that. And in the watch world, they suddenly became aware of the fact that you could sell more expensive watches where style was almost as important as the movement. And well, you know that this is the Chopard Happy Diamonds was revolutionary because it was a serious watch. Chopard is an incredibly important manufacturer.
Yes, and which are still very popular models today, the Happy Diamond, Happy Sport ranges. We also have, Piaget on here, which is famed for their extremely slim models, this model being the Altiplano. But I mean, around the 70s, would you say that it's also coming out with thin watches?
Not just thin watches, but high-end, I suppose we call them high-end watches that had superb mechanical movements rather than embracing quartz. But ultra thin, that battle did start around that time. There was I'm not sure if it was the previous decade, but there was a watch called the Delirium from Concord that was not much thicker than a credit card or even a business card, but it became an issue because there's a point where thinness is too much. Nowadays, the thinnest watches you'll have that probably have reinforced cases, perhaps when we think about things like the models from Bulgari. They're ultra thin but strong cases. This is an example of a watch that is, Piaget are the masters of the thin watch. I have the distinction of being one of the few journalists that took apart an Altiplano movement and put it back together.
Okay.
And I'm not a watchmaker, but trust me, there ain't a lot of space to play around in it.
No.
So thin watches aren't just about getting the thinnest watch on the wrist so it doesn't tangle one's cuff and so it looks chic. They really are a challenge to watchmakers. You are taking away from them the real estate that allows them to make a mechanical device. But this example is a perfect instance of where you've got a watch that you don't have to apologize. This is not a $5 or €5 quartz movement in a gold case. On every level, this is serious, and at the same time, it is seriously luxurious.
Another obviously 1970s, everybody who'd be watching this would be thinking, when are they going to mention the obvious? So obviously Genta came to the fore in the 70s.
Absolutely.
In 72 with the Royal Oak.
Yep. Which again is about applying a really luxurious air to something that in that case is a tool watch. Here it's a dress watch with a thin movement. The arrival of the Royal Oak changed everything. It took a few years for it to hit. The impact it has today is just, it would have been unforeseen 50 years ago. But it inspired, as you know, the Nautilus. And Genta's an interesting guy because even before that, he had done amazing work for IWC, for example. And here was a guy who knew how to add a suave look to a tool watch. So when the Royal Oak came out, the confusion that it followed, is it a diving watch? Is it a sport watch? Is it a watch just for golfers? Or, because it says Audemars Piguet on the dial, is it haute horlogerie? Is it a high-end watch? And I know that you have a special boutique for it.
Correct. In our Broadgate, in the city, we have the Audemars Piguet brand there.
And the clientele for these?
Well, the demand is off the scale for AP like never before. So it's, it has grown substantially in the same way that the Nautilus. I mean, obviously when they first came out, you used to see them in the windows, but obviously now even more difficult. And another model which from the era as well, I think we need to mention would be the GP Laureato.
Yes. And it's interesting that I don't believe it appeared in the film, but I believe it was named after the movie with Dustin Hoffman, The Graduate, because Laureato is Italian for graduate. I don't recall seeing him wearing one in the film. I know he drove an Alfa Romeo in the film. But it's a really controversial watch because hobbyists, enthusiasts, trolls, for lack of a better term, they want to pit the AP against the Nautilus, and anything else is considered copycat. But it's not the case. Girard-Perregaux, people do not realize what history that brand has and how self-contained it is. Girard-Perregaux isn't as well known or doesn't roll off the tongue as quickly as a bunch of enthusiasts would mention AP or Patek. I visited GP 25 years ago, and there wasn't a single thing that they didn't make. And the irony is they were supplying parts, especially tourbillons, to other brands. And I'd like to see the Laureato attain the level of desirability that it absolutely deserves on every level, especially credibility. This is not a copycat watch. But it's hard to explain this to people if they don't want to look beyond the advertising or beyond what they're told by maybe a salesperson, no offense. There really is a depth to all of this. And once you look into it, you realize that things that like Longines, for example, which we looked at earlier, is one of the great brands. It has a history second to none. The trouble is, we go through fashion. So right now, if you were talking vintage, it's owned, the top end is owned by Patek and Rolex. And it might get down to laws of supply and demand, but there are 600 manufacturers in Switzerland. And we don't need 600, but most of them do have something to say. And the Laureato categorically deserves to be in the same company as the AP, the Nautilus, and what we get to in the next decade, I believe.
You'll be pleased to know that our Laureato has made a massive comeback in the industry.
Thank goodness.
Aston Martin, Laureato, Girard-Perregaux, it's extremely hard to get hold of. So we're enjoying a lot of demand on that brand. All the best people wear Girard-Perregaux.
I noticed, yes. And I mentioned too that when I was a vintage watch dealer, the first piece I ever sold was a 1950s Gyromatic from GP, and it went for $50, and I wish I still had it.
Yeah, hey ho. We've all got those stories, eh?